studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican fraternity and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
and Michael Totaro.
And Mike, you've been part of tell me again,
the Society for Catholic Scientists.
Society for Catholic Scientists for how long?
Oh, well, not really super long. Probably, I would say maybe 4, 5, 6 years. Something
Okay.
like that, yeah.
They have a local chapter here, or
actually,
state or national? How's that work?
So it is a national organization. Oh, cool. Actually, I think there are some international members as well. It was actually founded by Dr. Stephen Barr, who was himself a theoretical physicist. He's retired from universities now, but it's amazing how many members there are, and from all the different science and engineering disciplines, and it's a great website, by the way. You can just Google Society for Catholic Scientists, and I think many of our listeners would be rather pleasantly surprised to see the number of Catholic scientists that we have today, but also those that we've had just over the past few centuries, and very well-known scientists, right, names that many of us certainly recognize. And so it's the idea is to live out sort of our Catholic faith as scientists, to show that there is really no conflict between science and faith.
And there never really has been. As a matter of fact, many of the scientists have, in the past, the leading scientists have been Catholic and Dominicans, which is, hey, that's our topic today.
That's right.
Are the Dominicans that have made an impact in science. And there's quite a few. I know we've done an episode on our patron, St. Albert the Great. And so we have to mention him still a little bit in some of his highlights, because he just studied many subjects in science, was a naturalist, and thought that basically, I think he said something like it was the second gospel, right? It was nature. And so you could learn so much about the Creator by studying his creation. And that's, I think, what a lot of the scientists in the church feel, and that's why we have always been leading, and there's never been an issue with science and our faith, because truth is the point of both our science and our faith, and truth is God. Therefore, it's all good.
Yeah, and truth, right? Veritas.
Yes.
Something that we Dominicans know and try and live out very, very well. So the Order of Preachers has been pretty significant in terms of the role of a bi-religious order in the history of science and its dialogue with faith. So we won't get into how the Dominican Order was founded, St. Dominic, of course, but this pursuit of truth really embraces sacred scripture, theology, philosophy, and the scientific study of the natural world. As you said, Cheryl, correctly, there never has been a conflict. The conflicts, the so-called conflicts that purportedly exist, certainly do not originate or emanate from the Catholic Church or Christianity in general, but unfortunately and somewhat embarrassingly, they really originate from scientists who just seek to just kind of demythologize everything, and just so anything that's not measurable, that does not occupy space, empirically measurable, those kinds of things, then they're non-existent.
And unfortunately, the church was kind of silent during these times when you had either atheist or agnostic scientists, spouting these thoughts, and there was really no one there to counter, to promote. And I know, thanks to Pope St. John Paul II, and many others in more recent times, has spoken about the union of faith and reason, faith and logic, and faith and science. So we're excited to hear more about some Dominican scientists.
Sure. Well, of course, I think it seems only natural and reasonable to start with our patron, St. Albert the Great.
That's right.
He is, in fact, the patron saint of scientists. And boy, what a blessing! And so he's really the foundational figure of the Dominican scientific tradition, right? He is known as the Doctor Universalis. He was one of the most accomplished natural philosophers of the Middle Ages. His interests and writings span many different areas, including botany, zoology, mineralogy, astronomy, physics, chemistry, geography. And unlike many medieval scholars, St. Albert insisted that knowledge of nature begins with careful observation, which, wow, that's a nice, very, natural sort of scientific idea. He also frequently corrected inherited opinions when they conflicted with empirical evidence, showing that as a Dominican, right, objective truth, even when you are with our disputatios, right, it's not like there's a sort of a battle that's being waged between two sides, but rather both sides are seeking to peel away at that sort of onion of truth and to get at the truth of whatever it is we are exploring and investigating. So really, he is essentially an important precursor to the experimental sciences.
He also, of course, he taught St. Thomas Aquinas. We know that. But I found something interesting when I was looking into the Dominican Scientists, and he taught someone named Theodoric of Friedberg. And what is so interesting about this to me is that Theodoric actually, he was a meticulous mathematician, and he figured out the way a rainbow worked way before anybody else did, right at the turn of the 14th century in the early 1300s. Theodoric, while everybody else was trying to think it was some way the clouds reflected or whatever the light, he's like, we got to go deeper. We got to go to the very smallest element, the raindrop. And he figured out with geometric proofs about the light going in, refracting, and then reflecting back, and then refracting again, and creating creating the rainbow, which you'll need an umbrella probably if your spot went. That must have came to my mind. And so all these proofs were there, and yes, everybody probably knows that other people later had to rediscover this because his work was all lost. But 300 years later, it was found and discovered that way before everyone else came up with how the rainbow worked, we had a Dominican who had figured it all out. And it was a student of St. Albert the Great. No surprise there. Right. So that was cool.
Yeah.
So St. Albert the Great was involved in many other aspects of science, and I think he wrote volumes and volumes, and obviously was extremely influential, extremely famous for centuries. And even in Dante's comedy, places St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Albert the Great together in this great area of the heaven of the sun because they were great lovers of wisdom. So even to this day, we can refer back to the great works of St. Albert the Great.
Yeah, it's worth noting, by the way, that in 1941, Pope Pius XII named St. Albert the Great the patron saint of natural scientists. So pretty recent. And what we've just discussed thus far really does, I think, I see it very optimistically as this is sort of the picture of reality of how we all of us should engage in sort of, dialogue and conversation. The heavens proclaim the glory of the Lord. And so there doesn't have to be this sort of fine line or even a thick line between science and our faith, because God is the source of all truth, because he is the source of all created things.
And I think, during this time of great discoveries, people must have more time to observe, just observation. Whether observing the rainbow, observing the plants, observing the animals. It just seems like that, in this great time period, they definitely took the time for observation and contemplation, and thereby, making that unification between faith and science.
Yep.
And you had mentioned a lot of the things that they observe, but one thing is that and we know this from biblical times, is the observation of the stars. And another person I found as an interesting Dominican scientist was Ignazio Danti. He's in the 1500s, and actually he helped Pope Gregory Pope Gregory placed him in a prominent role of helping him with the Gregorian calendar, which, because he was just an astronomer.
Right.
I mean, he did many other things as well, but that's another Dominican. And I believe one other thing that I saw about him, which is really interesting, he did a lot of paintings of the maps and so forth. And Pope Pius V, when he was who is another great Dominican, had him do maps. And it says that he commissioned him to do, it's a gallery of maps. And so there's 40 large-scale frescoes depicting a region in perspective of the Italian peninsula.
Wow.
And I believe, Jeff, I mean, we need to look into this before we say this, but I believe we've seen that in the Vatican.
If you go to the Vatican museums and you walk down those long hallways,
Yes.
and you look up and you see these maps of Italy, and you wonder, why are there maps of Italy, maps of
Yeah.
places not that far from where they're standing. It's thanks to another Dominican who had this talent for not only just drawing maps, but making them scale-like.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Ignazio Danti. Pretty cool.
Very good. Well, of course, we can't overlook St. Thomas Aquinas,
Of
the
course.
angelic doctor of the church. And when we think about St. Thomas Aquinas, naturally, we think, many things at that moment as we're contemplating St. Thomas, certainly as a great theologian, great philosopher, brilliant thinker, but he actually provided the philosophical and metaphysical framework that really does continue to shape Catholic engagement with science. And so, so he's not a scientist per se, but some of the most important kind of points that we can glean from St. Thomas's writings basically are as follows: creation is intelligible because it reflects the divine intellect. Secondly, human reason is capable of discovering genuine truths about nature. Thirdly, philosophy and science study secondary causes. We know that, for example, in science, the basic axiom is it must be somehow, either directly or indirectly observable, either directly or with instruments, tools, measurable, also reproducible in the sense that one who has performed such and such experiments and they get results and they draw some conclusions. So other scientists should be able to reproduce those experiments and get basically the same results. And then finally, theology studies the first cause, God himself. And so his synthesis really established, St. Thomas' synthesis established one of the central principles of Catholic intellectual life, which is authentic faith never fears authentic reason. There's no conflict between faith and science. There's no conflict between faith and reason. And so, not that St. Thomas actually said that precisely, but that's sort of a paraphrase, narrative about what he really intended, the message. And so it faithfully summarizes his conviction that faith and reason cannot ultimately contradict one another.
And so as we kind of move into, I don't want to say modern times, but other times, sure. There might be lesser known Dominican scientists that are out there. And tell us a little bit about them.
Sure. Well, during the 20th and 21st centuries, several Dominican scholars basically renewed the dialogue between Thomistic philosophy and modern science. So one in particular, Father Benedict Ashley, who passed away in 2013, he was one of the principal architects of contemporary Thomistic philosophy of nature. And so basically he integrated biology, philosophy of nature, medical ethics, anthropology, and Thomistic metaphysics. And I don't want to forget to mention this. So basically, if you're looking for, it's a tough read. I mean, I have it, and it's a great book, but it's difficult for me, maybe not for our listeners, but certainly for me. But it's a tome, and it's entitled "The Way Toward Wisdom" by Father Benedict Ashley. Just profound in its depth, but also its breadth. It just covers so much. But essentially, Father Ashley argued that scientific discoveries become fully intelligible only when considered alongside philosophical questions that concern causality, form, purpose, and the nature of the human purpose. And so Father Ashley's work significantly influenced Catholic bioethics and helped reestablish Thomistic philosophy as a fruitful dialogue partner with modern science.
You're listening to Christ Our King Catholic Radio for Acadiana. We are on 90.5 FM, 99.5 FM, and 12:30 a.m. We are your lay Dominicans, your Third Order Dominicans here in Lafayette, Louisiana. And this is our program, which we share the fruits of our contemplation with to you. And this is Studium to Studio. And we are here every Thursday at 4 p.m., thanks to Stein Lumber, with locations throughout all of Acadiana. So today we are talking about the great, not only just the great scientist or the great Catholic scientists, but the great Dominican scientists throughout history. And we've covered I guess you would say the top 2, 3, 4 in history, but there are so many other Dominican scientists that are contributing to science within the last 100 years, but also within our lifetime as well. And so, Mike, continue to tell us some other Dominican scientists that we might be interested in.
Sure, yeah. So a contemporary of Father Ashley's, and they were also colleagues and really good friends, another Dominican friar, Father William Wallace. He actually died a couple of years after Father Ashley. They lived literally, Father Ashley was born in 1915, he died in 2013. Father Wallace was born in 1918, he died in 2015. And so it's interesting. Father Wallace, his background is theoretical physics. And he transformed modern scholarship on the history of science. And so his research basically demonstrated that medieval Catholic thinkers, including Dominicans, made substantial contributions to scientific methodology and influenced figures such as Galileo. Okay, we all know Galileo.
Yeah.
Among Father Wallace's best-known works include Galileo and His Sources and the Modeling of Nature. I do not have the book Galileo and His Sources, but I do have the Modeling of Nature. So it is a fantastic book. If you're looking for a good, not just an introduction, but really you want a very solid sort of exposure to what I would consider as authentic philosophy of science, The Modeling of Nature by Father William Wallace is the one that I would turn to. It's a great book. Father Wallace showed that Thomistic realism provides a robust philosophical foundation for scientific inquiry. So yet another modern-day Dominican scientist.
And do you know of any others, like in the maybe 1500s, 1600s, like where we kind of went jumped. So I'm wondering,
to be honest with you, as I was preparing kind of for our discussion, I didn't want to. I wanted to be careful about given our 30-minute time limit.
Yes.
I kind of want to hit the high figures in the early, I guess the early times within the Dominican order, and then kind of jump more recent 100 years or contemporary. But I know there are some, of course,
yes.
And I'm sure
Well, we mentioned Ignazio Danti. That's
Right.
one. It was a really big one, too.
Sure, yes.
But, yeah, well, that gives us all something to do a little more research.
Sure,
So tell us some more about some of our recent ones.
Sure. Very contemporary of ours, Father Nicanor Austriaco, a Dominican friar. He's one of today's best-known Dominican scientists. So he holds doctoral degrees in both biology and theology. Mind-blowing, by the way. For me, one is enough, but he has two. And so his research spans molecular genetics, cell biology, evolution, bioethics, and Catholic moral theology. He actually became widely known during the fairly recent COVID-19 pandemic for he provided explanations about virology and vaccines from both scientific and theological perspectives. And so Father Austriaco exemplifies the Dominican conviction that essentially scientific excellence and theological depth strengthen one another. They really are hand in hand. Again, no competition. There's no, kind of battle that's this side versus that side. No, in fact, it's let us struggle together to continue to seek the truth, to come to know God better. Because even with, visible creation, we come to know God not directly but indirectly by way of his creation, because in every aspect of creation there is something of God. I just want to make sure this is not a pantheistic kind of statement, but there is something of God there because he is the creator of all things, visible and invisible. One final, there are a couple more, but one final one that's pretty well known is Father Davenport, Thomas Davenport. And he is himself a theoretical physicist and a Dominican friar. So he bridges theoretical physics with Thomistic philosophy. So after he finished his PhD in particle physics, he entered the Dominican order. And so his research is in the areas of philosophy of science, philosophy of nature, metaphysics, and physics and theology. And so Father Davenport's work explores like how modern physics raises questions that cannot be answered by physics alone, but require philosophical reflection. And as I was kind of preparing for our discussion today, I'm reminded of things that are happening. I'm not a physicist, of course, so I'm just a layperson. I know what I've read, and what I read is mostly just written for lay people. But there is this. It seems to me this sort of fairly recent up sort of surge, if you will, of on the part of physicists who are trying to again sort of debunk this idea of an intelligent designer. And I know we've addressed that in other segments, but most recently we have now this idea that many cosmologists and astrophysicists are kind of beginning to kind of support, and that is this notion of, because they can't really, because in science it's always about cause effect, right? Everything that you observe has some cause, okay, or causes. So what about the universe? Okay, so obviously it was easy peasy for the early theologians of the early church. Well, it's obvious, there's God is the ultimate first cause. Well, find a loophole for that. Well, here's the loophole. The loophole is, hey, you know what? Not that we're claiming this, but it seems plausible that the universe has always existed. And there was never a starting point, which blows my mind when I think about it. Because again, now you explain that, okay, but that's to me a sort of a convenient loophole. They're not saying that is what it is, but they're saying that, it's not implausible, okay.
Which is really strange because we literally know that everything in the cosmos is moving outwardly at an increasing pace, and we know exactly if we reverse that math that it would all have a beginning at a particular time, which we would call the Big Bang, which Father Lemaitre came up with the theory of the Big Bang. And most scientists have ascribed to that being it's not been refuted in any way, and everything we do, we see that proven. So they're really working hard to find, but which is, it is, like you said, it weakens everything. It ends up weakening the actual science, which has created a real problem in the world of science, I think, with people not trusting it.
Well, and, in a lot of discussions that, we have today or we see on social media today, it's, follow the science. And, people think that, if a scientist says something, then that is the absolute end of discussion, no more research on it, and that's just that. And Mike, is that the case with scientists? I mean, is that the case that if scientists comes up with something and then someone says, well, that's final? Is that the case?
No.
No.
No, absolutely not. I mean, basically every scientist who is truly a scientist, right, acknowledges that science is not definitive, but rather so regardless of the overwhelming evidence in support of some hypothesis, right, or some theory, it just takes one instance to the contrary to negate that. But every scientist knows this. And that's why it really sort of just boggles my mind. I don't understand, like, what happened to that basic axiom, which has been an accepted axiom for certainly centuries. I think even going back to the time of St. Albert and St. Thomas, because it's such a common sense sort of thing. It's like we observe such and such in nature, but just because it's happened a million times there's not absolute assurance that it's going to happen again. And so it's science, and that's part of what makes it really exciting, is that it is always under review. And it's not like one who has a theory and their theories seem to hold. Even Einstein, we still call them his theories. Okay, right. General and special relativity. They're not laws, as are Newton's laws of gravity. They're still theories, and so far no one has been able to come up with any sort of experimental refutation of Einstein. But they're still called theories, and that's for a reason. Theory of evolution. So a theory can be, in fact, debunked. But even so even a law is more, it's a stronger sort of type of thing. But again, going to your question, Jeff, it is the case that all scientists understand that there's nothing that has, like, we've determined it, therefore end of discussion. And how dare anyone bring up questions about it or that may challenge it? That's not science.
Recently, I took a seminar. I'm going to take a stab at this because it's really complex to explain, but I'm going to try to. The seminar was created and uncreated logos. The idea, I'm going to try to say in a short period of time, was we went through all the science, the chemistry, everything behind the idea that if I went to pick up a pencil, what happened in my brain when I decided to pick up a pencil between there and the muscles that moved. And at some point, there were movements within the, there were basically waves that ended up moving thousands of protons, which in return would move the muscle, right? So when you were talking about form, this came to me. The idea of form used to be this weird thing where it was like form was just sort of this greater ghostly perfection of something. But it was very much explained in this seminar that it's not the case. The form is a shape, and shape has no actual, you're not touching anything. It's a shape, right? So by the power of our free will, we move thousands of protons when nothing's actually touching it. It's literally shape moving protons that then moves the physical thing. So if you stop and think about removing metaphysics from the idea of science, you just simply need to pick up your pencil and start thinking of the idea that you have just by your own free will moved thousands of protons with nothing touching them, just a bunch of chemicals, and then eventually shape that moved it. Isn't that cool?
That is amazing.
I know.
So true. Yes.
But any final thoughts on science?
Well, so there are several others, but again, you can find this. I would certainly recommend that our listeners consider going to the Society for Catholic Scientists website. They have wonderful resources, great articles. All the articles are written for lay people, and you can really just have a wonderful time.
Well, remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart.